Our coverage, former Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards, also joining us, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. Neil Katyal also joins us. He's a former acting Solicitor General, now law professor at Georgetown University. All three are MSNBC contributors. I want to pick up on what the congressman just said about the threat of violence. One of the first people to thrust the threat of violence from the big lie about fraud into the public conversation on the right was Gabriel Sterling, Republican election official, a deputy of Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. Marjorie Taylor Greene attacked him at a meeting of the Integrity Caucus and was so, well, let me show it to you first, and we'll talk about what she did with it after.
Gabe, I do not consider you an expert on this issue. As a matter of fact, I consider you a major problem. And I want to tell you something else. For you to say there were no dead voters in Georgia, there was thousands of dead voters in Georgia. And then the other thing is, you have constantly shilled for this election, and I'm going to tell you, there was blatant, outright fraud in the 2020 election, complete and total fraud. You know it. You absolutely do know it. And I'm going to follow up with one more thing. Trump won Georgia. I know you don't like for me to say that, but I am convinced that he did. I'm born and raised in Georgia, lived there all my life, campaigned all over the state in the 2020 election. And to come in here for the Election Integrity Caucus and for you to be on the panel, it's actually insulting to election integrity.
So many lies in so little time, but we do have a lot of time. We got 2 whole hours. So Neil, there were not thousands of dead people. Donald Trump did not lose. But what I want our viewers to know is that the person who put that out into the information, if we want to call it that, disinformation ecosystem, was Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to be seen by the radicalized base that we now know Fox as a business model lies to, wanted that base to see her roughing up Gabriel Sterling, a Republican election official in Georgia. We don't like to amplify these things, but I also think the only thing worse than the potential for amplification is to look away when this is happening. What are your concerns?
Yeah, 100%. I think Americans need to see it. And it really does highlight what happened to the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party of Ronald Reagan. I mean, the idea that this person is leading anything is even being put on TV alone, forget about holding a position of power and so close to the speaker, is to me unfathomable. Everything she says is a lie. Indeed, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take the words of Tucker Carlson or, you know, Ingraham or all those people whose texts now say, yeah, all of this was bogus and not true. So, you know, I very much worry about the health of our democracy when someone like this, when a major political party has this kind of person as their figure. There is no equivalent on the Democratic side. You know, AOC or someone is not nearly saying the kind of coup-like, corrosive, totally blatantly wrong stuff that Marjorie Taylor Greene is.
So, Frank, she says, I misspoke, she says Donald Trump did not lose. Of course, Donald Trump lost. She says complete and total fraud, and you know it. Again, Gabriel Sterling isn't just one of the people who stood by the thrice recounted result of the 2020 Georgia presidential election, but he was one of the first Republicans to stand before cameras and warn of violence, which of course would come to pass on January 6th. And since then, in the home of Speaker Pelosi and in the homes of 4 election officials in New Mexico. On this topic of the fodder that sits right at that fulcrum of political violence and the big lie about Donald Trump's election defeat, what led to it. What is, same question I asked Congressman Schiff, what is your today concern? What is that today picture?
Well, first, let's hit the last point here. There's no longer any denying the connection between the big lie and violence. We could probably spend the next hour talking about examples of the big lie inciting people to violence, including the gentleman who attacked the FBI Cincinnati field office and ended up being shot by state police in Ohio, on and on, Nancy Pelosi's husband. And now, where are we? This is really a significant point we're at. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, as part of the continuation and perpetuation of that big lie, now wants us to believe that only he in the legislative branch of government can assume the role of the executive branch and provide his own special discovery process, which is the province of DOJ and federal prosecutors in the executive branch, to the defendants and insurrectionists in the January 6 investigations. He is, as Adam Schiff referred to, in league now, not only with the big lie, but with the insurrectionists who believe the big lie. He's saying, I am you, you are me. And whether he's courting the vote of domestic extremists or somehow thinks this is the Republican Party moving forward, it leads to violence. And he's actually literally assisting, aiding and abetting those accused of violence on January 6th. We're seeing really the pinnacle so far, you know, in the legislative branch, at least, a Speaker of the House now doing this. And what's the impact of it? So he's essentially, with a wink and a nod, more than a wink and nod, saying, what you did is fine with me. I'm going to aid and abet you and even obstruct and delay the pending investigations into what you did. And by the way, I am getting the word on the street. It's already delaying the investigations. Already defense attorneys are saying, I need to go see that. Give me the 41,000 hours of footage. And judges, of course, are going to have to be reasonable, go, okay, I'll delay the trial proceedings. It's already bogged down, right? Prosecutors are being brought in, special AUSAs from Puerto Rico and Oregon, and defense attorneys are being hired all over the country to try and get this through the process. But no, we're going to be delayed now because the Speaker of the House has decided that he's now the executive branch of government and gets to provide what's called Brady material, exculpatory material, right? That is the decision of the prosecutors. If there's a dispute about what's being provided to the defense counsel, it's the judge in the trial who goes, I'll figure out what the defendant gets, not the Speaker of the House. That's where we are, in league with insurrectionists.
So, Neil, one of the reasons we're here with members of the House Republican caucus who are so tied into not just the events of that day, but the planning for January 6th. People like Scott Perry, people who were so acutely aware of the potential for violence that they themselves wore Kevlar vests, is because there was no effort, at least outward facing, by DOJ to ask them what they knew or hold them accountable. What in your mind explains this at this point? As we see, you know, and I've had a lot of conversations about why we have a criminal justice system. At least one of the reasons is to avoid the crimes from happening again. It seems that on that count, they have failed. These Republicans are now power brokers. They were fringy lunatics who had a direct line to the White House, but not necessarily power brokers. They have ascended the power ladder, and they are now more powerful. And from watching the Garland-Monaco Justice Department, that says to me they may be more cautious about investigating those members. Just talk about this delay of 2 years in seeming to have any interest in holding accountable any members who may know about the planning or being responsible for the planning of 1/6.
Yeah, Nicole, it's unfathomable to me, actually. You know, if you talk to prosecutors, one of the things they say about criminals is if you don't indict, if you don't, you know, do something right away, it encourages and incentivizes them to do something worse the next time, that you've got to teach them their lesson. And here you've got members of Congress, not everyone and not every Republican, of course, but some members who were deeply involved in January 6th. And, you know, that requires investigation, thorough investigation. And yes, they'll throw up all sorts of stuff like speech or debate immunity, the same thing that Vice President Pence is trying to argue now. But, you know, it's pretty easy for prosecutors to get past all of that. So I'm really worried about it. I'm worried about the fact that we've gone now more than 2 years without any sort of serious investigation of these members of Congress. And now we're seeing the consequences. They feel emboldened. I mean, I can't say that I think it's the greatest idea in the world to give the very people who were willing to attack the Capitol access to the video footage that shows where they went wrong the first time. But that's what's going on right now. And, you know, so yes, I think there very much should have been a serious investigation, and all outward signs are there was not one, at least when it comes to members of Congress.
Donna, and they're not really strong signs that there's a particularly robust one now, but they don't feel emboldened, they are emboldened. It's not a feeling. They've been emboldened, they've been elevated. Kevin McCarthy has said there's nothing I wouldn't do for her about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Scott Perry has powerful positions. He's not been left out of committee assignments. All of them. So I wonder what you think the today status is of the House Republican Conference in its alignment, now public and brazen and enthusiastic, with the 1-6 insurrectionists.
Well, Kevin McCarthy decided that in his pathway toward the speakership, that he was willing to sacrifice everything, including our constitutional republic. He made his bed with the insurrection caucus, and he continues to, fluff the pillows. And I think that, going forward, what it says to us is that the Republican Party is on the outskirts of where the majority of the American people are. Let's remind ourselves that the majority of Americans concluded that January 6th was indeed there were insurrectionists, and that they were trying to undermine and overthrow our constitutional governance and the peaceful transition of power. That is a conclusion that the majority has taken. Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans, on the other hand, have decided that they are making their peace with the insurrectionists. There is no separating them anymore. And so people who say this moderate Republican or that moderate Republican are all wrong when it comes to the Congress. There is a batch of them, and they are the majority in the Congress, who have chosen the insurrection side. And the outcome of that is that because there's been no accountability for those members of Congress, and I still hold out hope that eventually the special counsel Smith is going to get to that, but I'm not sure. But what it means is that it exposes all of us to the possibility that this will happen again. And so I think we are at a very dangerous moment.
Donna Edwards, thank you for your candor. Thank you for starting us off. Frank and Neil, stick around when we come back.